For the better part of a century, there's been this one big idea, this one concept that has totally shaped how we approach recovery after a brain injury. So today, let's unpack it. We're talking about the Bobath approach.
Okay, so let's just start with the most basic, most fundamental question, right? When something like a stroke or a serious brain injury happens, that clean connection between the brain and the muscles, it gets scrambled, it's disrupted. So how on earth does the body start over? How does it relearn to move? And that is the huge challenge at the very core of neurorehabilitation. I mean, we're not just talking about doing a few reps to strengthen a bicep here. This is about retraining the entire control center, the big boss. We're talking about the brain.
And look, this isn't some rare niche problem. It's a reality for people dealing with a whole range of conditions. And for decades, one of the most influential, most widespread answers to that big question we asked has been the Bobath approach. You might also hear it called neurodevelopmental treatment, or just NDT for short.
So where did this whole thing even come from? Well, for that, we gotta jump in the time machine and go all the way back to the 1940s. That's where we meet Berta and Carl Bobath. Now, get this. She was a physiotherapist and he was a neurologist. Talk about a power couple. Their partnership completely changed the game, a real paradigm shift in therapy. But here's what's so cool about this. The Bobath approach isn't some dusty idea stuck in the past. Oh no, it has evolved, and I mean dramatically. It started out with this idea of just trying to stop or inhibit abnormal reflexes and that really tight muscle tone you see. But now, with everything we've learned about the brain, the focus has completely shifted. It's all about real-life, functional tasks, about motor learning, and about harnessing the brain's amazing ability to rewire itself, what we call neuroplasticity.
And you can really see that shift in philosophy right here. Think about it. It moved from a therapist basically being a mechanic, passively correcting a person's movement, to being more like a coach, actively guiding that person to solve their own movement puzzles. It's a huge leap from just fixing to teaching. And that is so revolutionary because it puts the patient in the driver's seat. They become an active part of their own recovery. Okay, so we've got the backstory, we get the philosophy, but what does this actually look like, in a real therapy session? Let's dive into the core principles. All right, first things first. The most important thing to get is that this is not a cookie-cutter recipe. It's not a list of exercises where you just do 3 sets of 10. No way. It's a dynamic, living, breathing, problem-solving framework. Yeah, the textbook definition calls it a hands-on approach, but the key is that it's totally individualized. It's all about one thing, making a real, tangible difference in a person's actual life. Okay, if you remember one thing, one single phrase from this whole deep dive, make it this one. Proximal stability for distal mobility. Seriously, tattoo it on your brain. This is the absolute central pillar of the entire Bobath concept. All it means is that to control the stuff far away from your center, like your hands and feet, you first have to have control of the stuff in the middle, your trunk. So proximal what for distal what? What does that even mean? Well, this analogy just nails it. It's the cannon from a canoe idea. Picture this. You're trying to fire a cannon, but you're in a tiny, wobbly canoe. It's gonna be a disaster, right? You'll have zero accuracy. Well, your arms and legs, those are the cannons. And your trunk, your core, that's the canoe. If you want to move those limbs with any kind of skill or precision, you absolutely have to have a stable boat first. And this is where the magic of the therapist really comes into play. Their hands are so important. But they're not there to force anything. They're not there to push or pull. Think of their hands as a guide, providing this sensory roadmap for the brain. They're giving the body the information it needs to feel and rediscover the right way to move. It's like a physical conversation happening between the therapist and the patient's nervous system. We can actually break this art of handling down into 4 main jobs. First, the therapist's hands are providing tactile feedback, just giving the brain that raw sensory data. Second, they're making sure the body is in the best possible position to move, getting that alignment just right. Third, they help guide the weight shift, kind of initiating and controlling the flow of the movement. And then, and this part is absolutely crucial, they slowly, gradually back off. They fade their support so the patient's own brain and body can take the controls. All right, enough theory. What does this look like in the real world, with real people? Let's put this therapy into action. Okay, so take someone who's had a stroke. The goals here are going to be super specific. A therapist might be working on reducing spasticity, that's that intense abnormal muscle tightness you can get, and they'll use techniques like having the person bear weight on their affected side. What that does is send a massive flood of sensory information back up to the brain, basically screaming, hey, this arm is still here, pay attention to it. It's all about fighting that tendency for the brain to forget one side of the body so they can get back to functional things, like being able to walk again. Now, let's switch gears. For a child with cerebral palsy, the approach looks a little different. Here, a big part of the job is to help manage those abnormal reflexes, those involuntary movements that can kind of get in the way of purposeful action. The therapist will then guide the child through the natural sequence of development, learning to control their head, then sitting up, then moving. It's all about building a really solid foundation for every movement that will come later in life. Okay, so it's really important to say no single therapy approach is a magic wand. And the Bobath concept, well, it's definitely had its share of debates and heavy discussions in the therapy community. So let's get into that. Let's talk about its evolving legacy. We gotta have a balanced view here, right? On the one hand, people love that it's so holistic and individualized. It really emphasizes the quality of movement, not just getting from A to B. But on the other hand, there are limitations. It can be super time-consuming. It demands therapists who have a ton of specialized training, and honestly, the hard scientific evidence that it's flat out better than other methods, well, it's kind of mixed. So yeah, it's a powerful tool for sure, but it's not the only tool in a toolbox. And that's exactly why the modern version of this approach doesn't live on an island. A good therapist today isn't a Bobath purist. They're blending these core principles with all sorts of other evidence-based techniques, things like task-oriented training, constraint-induced therapy, even cool tech like virtual reality and functional electrical stimulation. The goal is always the same: mix and match to create the absolute best, most effective program for that one individual person. So, if there's a big takeaway here, it's this. The whole field of neurorehab has evolved. The focus has shifted way beyond this old, narrow idea of just stopping bad muscle tone. It's now about something so much bigger, so much more empowering. It's about sparking active learning, getting people back to doing things in the real world, and helping them participate fully in their own lives. And that kind of leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on, doesn't it? As we see more and more amazing technology, we're talking robotics, AI, making its way into rehab clinics, what does that mean for the future of this kind of skilled, hands-on human-to-human therapy? Where does it fit in?